Today, we're diving into a timeless story, a really chilling one, actually. It comes from the Miscellaneous Treasure Sutra, and it asks a pretty profound question. What happens when our most secret, malicious thoughts actually get put into action? It's a tale about how our deepest intentions can, really shape our destiny in ways we could never, ever predict. And really, the whole story boils down to this one question. Can the trap you set for someone else end up being your own undoing? Let's jump in and see how one family's secret resentment leads to an answer they absolutely never saw coming. All right, so let's set the scene. On the surface, we have what looks like a perfectly peaceful home. There's a Brahmin man, his elderly mother, and his beautiful young wife. But as you can probably guess, underneath all that calm, a storm of resentment is brewing, and it's just about to break. And here's where things get really complicated. You've got this stark contrast between what things look like and what they actually are. To everyone else, the daughter-in-law was just perfect. She was kind, she was devoted. But on the inside, she felt completely trapped. She saw her mother-in-law as this huge obstacle to her own freedom, her own desires. And that resentment just sat there and festered until it turned into a really sinister plot. Her plan was just so cruelly cunning. First, she doubled down on her act of devotion, right? She played the part so well that her husband was completely and totally fooled. Then she planted this little seed of an idea. What if earthly comforts just weren't enough for his dear mother? What if they could send her to heaven to enjoy divine comforts? She actually framed this murderous idea as the ultimate act of love, and her trusting husband, completely deceived, he agreed. So the stage was set. They dug this massive pit, filled it with wood, and created a blazing inferno. They even threw a huge party, inviting all their friends and family to celebrate the mother's ascension to heaven. But of course, once all the guests went home, it was just the three of them, left alone in the dark, standing right in front of those flames. Okay, so this is it. This is the moment the daughter-in-law's evil plan is finally put into motion. The party's over, the night is dark, and that fire is just roaring, ready for its victim. Can you just imagine the heat from that fire, the sound of the crackling wood? Without saying a word, they gave the elderly woman a heartless shove, pushing her toward the pit and toward what they were sure was her death. But then, something completely impossible happened. Just as she was about to plunge straight into that inferno, her fall was broken. Out of nowhere, right there inside the pit itself, a small stone staircase just appeared. It literally caught her, saving her from the flames raging below. It was this moment of just inexplicable grace in the face of pure evil. And just like that, the mother was completely unharmed, just resting there on this impossible staircase. Meanwhile, her son and daughter-in-law peered down into the smoke and fire, and they just assumed their plan had worked. Believing she was gone, they turned their backs and walked home. Now, you might think the story ends right there, but oh no, fate had so much more in store for this poor mother. Her ordeal in the fire pit was over, but her journey through the night was really just beginning. So as the fire started to die down, the mother climbed that little stone staircase and got out of the pit. She was all alone in the dark, terrified of wild animals, so she found a small tree to climb for safety. But just as she got settled, a whole new danger appeared. A gang of bandits, fresh from a robbery and carrying sacks of treasure, decided to rest directly underneath her tree. The poor woman, she was so terrified she tried to stay perfectly still. But then, a little cough just escaped her lips, and that sound, coming from the darkness above them, absolutely terrified these superstitious bandits. They thought it was a ghost, so they dropped everything, all the gold, all the jewels, and just fled into the night. When the sun came up, the mother climbed down from the tree, gathered up all of the abandoned riches, and simply walked home. And when she knocked on the door, her son and daughter-in-law opened it and just froze. They didn't see their mother. They saw a ghost, returned from the heavens and covered in treasure. Seeing how shocked they were, the mother brilliantly played along with their delusion. "Yes, I went to heaven," she told them. "Our relatives were all there and they gave me all these jewels. But being an old woman, I couldn't carry anymore. They told me that if you came, they would give you even more." And this incredibly clever lie is what sets the final act of our story in motion. The daughter-in-law, who started this whole thing motivated by resentment, was now completely consumed by something just as powerful: pure greed. The daughter-in-law heard the story. She saw all those jewels, and her mind just lit up with avarice. All she could think about was the greater treasure that was waiting for her. She didn't question it for a second. She was totally blinded by greed. She immediately demanded that her husband dig another pit and light another fire so she too could travel to heaven and claim her riches. And just like that, in a moment of what you could call perfect karmic irony, she willingly jumped into the fire she had prepared. The very end she had designed for her mother-in-law became her own. She was consumed by the flames of her own greed. So obviously, this story is way more than just a dramatic tale. It's a really profound teaching about cause and effect. It reveals a deep spiritual truth about the consequences of our intentions, especially toward the people closest to us. At the very heart of this teaching is this concept of a field of merit. So think of it this way. Our parents are like incredibly fertile soil. A tiny seed of kindness planted in that soil can grow into a huge tree of good fortune. But on the flip side, a tiny seed of ill will can grow into a whole forest of suffering. The karmic return on our actions, good or bad, toward our parents is just uniquely and powerfully amplified. So this story really leaves us with 3 huge lessons. First, there's this boomerang effect of our intentions, and it's incredibly precise. The exact harm the daughter-in-law planned for her mother-in-law came right back to her. Second, you can see this dangerous chain reaction. Her resentment morphed into malice, which was then instantly overtaken by blinding greed. And finally, the story shows us how our inner state creates our reality. The bandits heard a ghost, the couple saw a ghost, but the mother, she saw an opportunity. And that really leaves us with a final thought. This story teaches a simple but incredibly powerful law of the universe. What we plant for others, we ultimately harvest for ourselves. So the real question it asks each of us is, what seeds of kindness or seeds of harm, are you planting in your world today?